The Middle Ages was marked by outbreaks of numerous diseases that spread throughout populations across the world. The Black Death is often regarded as the biggest threat to human health during that time. But there were many other illnesses prevalent that caused far more deaths than the plague. Let's travel back in time to the Middle Ages and take a look at some of these medieval health problems and see why, long before the use of tumor-causing chemicals like those found in the tobacco industry, cancer rates were still quite high. The book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization, is an extraordinary 400-plus page encyclopedia that captures humanity's greatest inventions in an unparalleled medieval engineering hybrid style, blending masterful scribe artistry with modern CAD-like precision. Beyond its stunning artwork and thick map pages that make it one of the most beautiful books I've ever held, the book covers an immense range of topics from astronomy to siege engines, practical enough to help anyone rebuild after an apocalypse, or just impress as the smartest survivor. One fascinating festive section you won't want to miss is dedicated to Santa Claus, exploring the rich folklore and history behind this iconic figure in a way that fits perfectly with the rest of the medieval theme. The book doesn't stop there, however. Packed with millions of sections, it offers content that captivates readers of all levels, from the simplest and most accessible facts to incredibly complex and significant knowledge. Adding to the allure, the book even contains a hidden quest throughout its pages. This secret puzzle has challenged readers worldwide, with only 7 people so far having solved it, making the reading experience not just educational, but also incredibly fun. Whether you are drawn to its engaging stories, intricate details, or challenging puzzles, this book is a treasure trove that keeps your attention from start to finish. This video is proudly sponsored by the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization. If you want a smart, stunning gift that fuels curiosity and supports our channel, check the link in the description and grab your copy now. And now for today's video. Welcome to Medieval Madness. Coming in waves. As far as the Middle Ages go in terms of epidemics, the plague first struck in 542 and was followed by waves of illnesses that included smallpox, measles, tuberculosis, anthrax, scabies, sweating sickness, dancing mania, leprosy, and the most famous bubonic plague known as the Black Death, which hit in 1346 and killed somewhere between a third and half the population of Western Europe. It then triggered an unrelenting number of smaller plague epidemics that besieged the continent for over 300 years. In some histories written about the Middle Ages, the bubonic plague is practically the only disease mentioned, which got us thinking, what about all of the other illnesses? What were they like? Life for the medievals was unhygienic. In the countryside, houses, and castles for that matter, were cold, dark, and damp. They had no idea that filthy sanitation, domestic uncleanliness, and poor personal hygiene could breed germs. The American historian C. Warren Hollister mentions how in their smoky homes, quote, peasants slept on straw that crawled with vermin, many people usually shared the same bedding, and the smells of sweat and manure were always present, and therefore largely unnoticed, meaning that flies buzzed everywhere. In the cities, according to Ian Mortimer's Time Traveller's Guide to Medieval England, quote, there are small alleys, sometimes no more than 6 or 7 feet wide. Houses here have little light, some alleys are barely more substantial than muddy paths, and if householders fail to clear them, before long they become dank, smelly, and altogether unsavory. Vermin and flies were ever present. In the winter, when fresh fruit and vegetables weren't available, or in times of failed crops and famine, malnutrition left the young and old vulnerable to the diseases that it caused. The continuous exposure to parasites and bacteria left them helpless against any contagion. The medievals knew that contagious diseases could spread from one victim to another, but they had no idea how. There were treatments on offer from physicians and healers, but with their reliance on the theory of the 4 humours and remedies based on superstition, cures were a long way off. Ring my bell. Leprosy was one of the most feared diseases during the Middle Ages. Caused by a bacteria, it attacked the nerve endings and skin. Painful and disfiguring, although not highly contagious, it was prevalent throughout the medieval world, and a horrifying disease not just because of its symptoms, but because of how society treated the sufferers. No one was ever cured of leprosy. All that they could do was endure the agonizing symptoms and wait for a miserable death. One creatively named nun, Alice the Leper, died in 1250. Her life and death were recorded by a monk. At the end of Alice's life, he wrote the following, quote, "All who caught sight of that body were shocked to a standstill, awestruck as at the sight of some horrible monster. Deprived of the use of her body and any of its limbs, she was committed to her bed, just as a rotting corpse is committed to the earth, as if to let the rotting itself finish her off. Her hands were all long since shrunken from the illness, their skin fissured like the bark of a tree. The skin of her chest, head and arms likewise resembled tree bark, cracked from the excessive dryness. Her legs closely resembled a calf that was skinned. They were also swollen, as were her feet. From her body oozed loose flesh and abundant pus. No single part remained that was restful and not yet in the grip of the illness." End quote. The spread of leprosy prompted the earliest attempts to isolate people with a contagious disease. Fear of the infection meant that most of society, including physicians, shunned lepers. In some European countries, they were exiled or made to carry a bell or rattle that alerted citizens of their approach. For some unknown reason, cases of leprosy began to decline in the 13th century. It's possible that some form of herd immunity was established, or simply that the isolation of lepers helped to curb the spread. Eaten alive. In 2013, archaeologists excavated the French castle of Saranda-Colonnes in Cyprus. Many Crusader knights had been stationed at the castle, which was built after King Richard I of England captured the island during the Third Crusade in 1191. Analysis of the latrines in the castle showed that at least 15 to 20% of the knights died from malnutrition and infectious diseases. The eggs of two types of parasite, the roundworm and the whipworm, were found in soil sediment in the lavatories of the long-dead knights. Poor hygiene conditions meant that the eggs were transmitted orally through fecal matter, and because the worms feed on the nutrients that humans digest, the knights would have suffered badly from malnourishment and possible starvation. As leprosy declined, a new disease began to stalk the medievals. Tuberculosis might not have caused the same external damage as leprosy, but it was a more efficient killer. Usually, the bacteria attacked the lungs, destroying the tissue and causing death. It was called consumption by the medievals because it appeared to consume the victims. Sometimes TB bacteria would attack the lymph nodes, causing large swellings in the neck, and was called scrofula. It was also known as the King's Evil because in both England and France the monarch was believed to have inherited a miraculous power that could cure the illness. It began in 11th century France during the reign of King Philip I. The idea of the touchings caught on and were adopted by King Henry I of England in the early 12th century. Following the act of public touching, the king presented the affected person with an angel on a gold-plated coin. This was hung around the neck on a ribbon to ward off the disease. A lethal cocktail. In the cities, especially because of crowded living conditions, diseases such as epidemic typhus were spread by body lice, other types by mites and fleas. Symptoms include a very high fever, a rash, delirium, coma, and death. People came down with dysentery and typhoid fever because of their unhygienic surroundings. The bacteria was spread from food and water contaminated by fecal matter. The ongoing symptoms of chronic diarrhea from dysentery quickly caused dangerous levels of dehydration. Untreated typhoid fever took around 3 weeks to systematically exhaust and emaciate the victim. Measles and smallpox were often confused with one another, and both could easily overwhelm people with weakened immune systems due to a lack of the right nutrition. Various influenza-type viruses quickly tore through the population, shortening medieval life expectancy, especially among the young and the old. Only around 9% of medievals reached the grand old age of 60. Then in 1346, along came the greatest threat that the world had ever known, as the Black Death spread rapidly across the globe. Invader. Biological anthropologist Dr. Jenna Dittmar has now concluded that we need to add cancer to the list of major diseases that affected the medievals. A team from the University of Cambridge analysed 143 adult skeletons taken from 6 medieval cemeteries from the surrounding areas in 2021. The cemeteries ranged in ages from 6th to early 16th centuries and included one at an Augustinian friary and another at the Hospital of St. John the Evangelist, a place that would have cared for the sick and the destitute. It was the first study of its kind to use X-rays and CT scans to find evidence of cancer among skeletal remains. Before this, only exterior lesions on the bones were examined, and that suggested that cancer was a rarity among the medievals, with less than 1% of the population being affected. Only the skeletons that had intact pelvis, femora, and spinal columns were included in the study, as they were expected to be the most likely to contain metastases that have spread from the original site of the cancer, usually in soft tissue organs. Obviously, the skeletons were long since decomposed, and as not many cancers spread to the bones, only a few of them are visible on its surface. Dr. Piers Mitchell, who headed the research, searched within the bones for signs of malignancy. From their findings using the skeletons of 46 women, 96 men, and 1 individual of unknown gender, the team predicted that somewhere between 9 and 14% of medieval Britons developed cancer. Dr. Dittmar added, quote, "Until now, it was thought that the most significant causes of ill health in medieval people were infectious diseases such as dysentery and bubonic plague, along with malnutrition and injuries due to accidents or warfare. We now have to add cancer as one of the major classes of disease that afflicted medieval people." End quote. But the scientists have pointed out that today in modern Britain, by the time they die, some 40 to 50% of people will have cancer, which is 3 or 4 times higher than the most recent study indicates it was during the Middle Ages. It's likely that there are a range of causes for the high rates of cancer today, including the consequences of tobacco usage, as it began to be imported into Europe in the 16th century due to the colonization of the Americas, as well as the effects of pollution that accompanied the rise of the Industrial Revolution. It's also possible that the viruses which can cause DNA damage are far more widespread because of global travel, and with people just simply living longer, they obviously have more time to develop cancer. In the Middle Ages, it's likely that cancer was triggered by bacteria, viruses, or parasites. Just as today, there would have been people with a genetic predisposition to cancer. A 15th century mummy from Italy was found to have a cancerous tumour of the colon, and a biopsy identified a mutated gene commonly found with this type of cancer. G.O.A.T. A team of researchers, which included both Jenna Dittmar and Piers D. Mitchell, published an article titled "The Greatest Health Problem of the Middle Ages," in which they agreed that the biggest health challenges for the medievals were, quote, "infant and child deaths followed by various infectious diseases, of which the most significant single one was probably tuberculosis." They continued, quote, "We need to dethrone plague as the poster child for medieval health problems. Plague is visible, dramatic, and famous, but it is merely the tip of the iceberg. Across the later Middle Ages as a whole, your risk of dying from infant and childhood diseases was probably 15 to 20 times higher than your risk of dying from plague, and your risk of dying from any of half a dozen endemic bacterial and viral infections was 4 to 8 times higher." They continue, quote, "Medieval people lived in a sea of pathogens which assailed them continually, particularly when their immune systems were compromised by hunger, poverty, or other illnesses. They died in droves. Cumulatively, infectious diseases formed a force as omnipresent, powerful, and invisible as gravity, causing grief, molding settlement patterns, deciding the fate of enterprises such as campaigns of warfare, and shaping demographic regimes." Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video, as we do release other videos like this every week. So until next time, hope everyone has an amazing week. Cheers!